Hello, this is David Simpson. I'm at Fellsmere Grade Recreation Area. We're doing a big sit. I'm going to sit in one spot, wait for all the birds of the world to come to us. Or at least that's the theory behind a big sit. Obviously they don't all do that, but you do have some pretty interesting experiences on big sits when I've done them in the past. Past big sits in this area, I've turned up as much as 73 species in a half a day. That was in the fall when there was a lot of fall migrants coming through. This is January. We got mostly winter birds, have spoonbills nesting near us, have a vermilion flycatcher hanging out. We've had a few flights of wading birds coming out, glossy ibises, great egrets, there's great blue herons nesting nearby here, vultures roosting, some ducks fleeing the hunters in the area, ringneck ducks mainly. I've had a few mottled ducks and a blue-winged teal go by. It's pretty interesting to sit in one spot. I've been a bit of a speed birder in the past. I've gone and done big days. I've driven 800 miles in a day, seen how many species of birds I could find. So to sit in one spot like this is a little different than my past experience, but a lot of fun just to watch the changes over the course of the day as the birds wake up and then they go about their day and then they settle down later in the day and the vultures come up, maybe you get a short-tailed hawk. So it is pretty interesting, pretty fascinating experience. And we're doing this to promote the resurrection of the Space Coast Birding and Wildlife Festival, which we're determined to get started again in 2024 in some form. Probably a little abbreviated from what we'd done before, but we got a lot of people interested. A lot of people were disappointed when the festival dissolved. So we're hoping to get people excited and get them back out here in the Space Coast area next year around this time. So this is part of the promotion, letting people know there's a lot of birds around out here. Right next to us here, we've got a little interesting feeding phenomenon. The end of the canal here often gets choked up with vegetation, floating vegetation, dollarweed, water lettuce, sometimes hyacinth gets in there and grasses. But that little platform provides a foothold for species like especially little blue herons really love that situation to feed in. We get tricolored herons in there. Green herons like to feed along that edge there. The common gallinules come out. Blackbirds and grackles in there. It's like a giant bird feeder here. So currently we've got a couple gallinules in there. There was a green heron along the edge. A tricolored was out. We also had a little blue heron earlier in there, but it's an interesting little setup here. Kind of a wild bird feeder, if you will. Water Management District comes in periodically and clears it out because they do need the water to be able to flow through there. But as it grows back in, you can just sit here and see all sorts of interesting things come into there. Warblers, wading birds, water birds, herons, egrets, everything likes to come in and partake of the food that lives in there. Frogs, fish, bugs, all sorts of things will be in there.
I have a birding question. Black vultures and turkey vultures are some of my favorite birds. Can you tell me how to attract them to my yard?
Well, you can put dead stuff in your yard. That's one way of doing it. Another way is having a retention pond, I guess, or a pond of some sort with open grass around the edge. They like to bathe. They're actually quite clean birds. They will hang out next to that pond and bathe themselves before going to roost at night. Fellsmere Grade Recreation Area is famous for the nesting roseate spoonbills out here. There's a couple of spoil islands in the middle of the canal, and roseate spoonbills for many years now, maybe about 10 years by now, maybe even more, have decided that that's their nesting site out there. Wading birds like to nest on islands surrounded by water, surrounded by alligators, so that their number one predator, the raccoons, can't get in there and eat their nest. If they eat their babies, eat their eggs. If a raccoon is able to get into a colony, it can devastate the colony. They'll just eat everything in there. Not so much the adult birds, but the eggs and the babies. So this spot here is perfect, surrounded by foraging areas, very isolated islands. Not much chance of a raccoon getting across that water without getting nailed by an alligator. At this point in January, the main breeding birds that are in there are the roseate spoonbills that are starting up, the great egrets are starting up, some of the anhingas are also starting to nest in there. Later in the season, we'll see various other species come in here, most commonly tricolored herons and snowy egrets, sometimes little blue herons. Some years we've had white ibises and glossy ibises in there. Every year it seems like there's a different mix. There are several other nesting islands around here, so often the other birds will go to other islands to nest. We do have nearby in Fellsmere headwaters, Fellsmere Lake. Next door here we have the tricolored herons and little blue herons have decided to nest in the little clumps of Brazilian peppers and amongst the cattails there. Also have boat-tailed grackles nearby, like to get on camera or get on the audio at least. One of the interesting things about this Fellsmere recreation area, we have a lot of short grass and mowed areas and fences around here and little weed lines. So we see a lot of palm warblers bopping around here. Palm warbler is the warbler that acts like a sparrow. They often get in the sparrow fields and get down in the weeds, they do sometimes get in palm. They also bob their tails. That's one of their distinctive characteristics. We will see them around here. They're interesting thing about palm warblers, when we see them early in the fall, they're kind of dull, a little bit of yellow under the tail, not a whole lot of other, just kind of dull yellowish and brownish, a little bit of streaking on them. As the winter goes on, you see them getting gradually brighter as the dull edges of their feathers wear off and the rusty cap starts to come out, the eye line gets more pronounced, the yellow in the throat starts to come out more, sometimes even the streaks come out a little bit more, and they start to turn gradually into the brighter spring palm warblers that we see towards March or so. In amongst the palm warblers we have also savanna sparrows out here. The most common sparrow in most of Florida is the savanna sparrow in the wintertime. Very heavily streaked bird, very darkly streaked in the face, often a little bit of yellow in the lores, fairly bright pink legs on them. And most sparrows you see in Florida, if you say it's a savanna sparrow, you're going to be right about 99% of the time. But we did have a grasshopper sparrow has been out here today. You hear a little metallic little trill call, or a really high, thin call sometimes. You'll hear the grasshoppers. Mostly you hear them, you don't see them very often, but they will occasionally sit up on a fence post. But they also like this short grassy mowed area, so these long berms out here. The grasshopper sparrow is more common than you would realize, but once you learn that call, you'll observe them more often. You still won't see them very often, but you'll at least know they're there. And so every once in a while we get lucky and we have one actually come up and sit up on a fence post for us. But they're short-tailed, very buffy, no streaks on them, little flat head, big bill relatively speaking, and a little white eye ring. Often have wing bars on them as well. That's not always depicted in the field guides, but you will see them, especially in fresh plumage in the fall. The wing bars are basically just the pale edges of the coverts on the wings. So often birds that are in fresh plumage will have pale edges on those feathers where they don't normally have them. So you see birds with wing bars that don't normally have wing bars. Often it wears off as those pale edges wear off over the course of the season. Just had a least sandpiper fly over. That was number 66 for our big sit here at Fellsmere Grade Recreation Area. My first ever winter big sit. The last big sits that I did were in the fall. We get a lot of fall migrants, but 66 is pretty close to the efforts I've had before. 68 was my first one at up at Canal National Seashore at on the Shell Mounds out there. I had 68 species in a October big sit. When I was here at Fellsmere Grade Recreation Area last fall, we had 73 species, and I did one at Key in Manatee County had 69 species, including a lot of stuff that the locals didn't know were around out there, actually. So this one is poised to potentially at least get to second or third place. The official Big Sit that we do, the Big Sit competition sponsored by Birdwatchers Digest, is conducted in the second weekend of October. You can actually register your Big Sit and compete with other sit circles around the country and around the world. A lot of Audubon groups will use it as a fundraiser. You can pledge it like a birdathon, like a walkathon, except it's a birdathon, how many species you get, or you can just get donations. We have done that actually with Pelican Island Audubon here locally. That was what we did last fall. I'm hoping to get several sits going next time around, next October. Maybe get Space Coast Audubon involved as well. There's a lot of potential sit locations out here. Sebastian Inlet is a good one here at Fellsmere Grade. Out at TM Goodwin in the Broadmoor section, if we get a special permit, we might do one out there next fall. Orlando Wetlands Park, where Clay Taylor's doing a big sit this morning as part of the promotion for the festival. So there's a lot of different areas we could do big sits, and it's a lot of fun. I mean, it's kind of a shame this is only the fourth one I've ever done, because it is a really neat thing to do, and it saves a lot of gas. You get there and you just sit there. You're not driving 800 miles like I've done on big days in the past. So it's a fun thing, and hopefully we'll get a lot more of them going in the future. And you can do your own. You don't have to wait for the official Big Sit. You can just go out and do a stationary count somewhere and sit there for hours. And in fact, I'll probably be doing some more of that just because it's fun to do. So, well, it's about noon. Been out here for 5.5 hours. We're wrapping it up with about 74 species. It's a new personal record for me. Previous high was 73 species. So a little bit surprised to get that many at this time of year, but it's a great birding spot out here, and there's a whole lot more species if you go wandering out from here. We had 98 in the Broadmoor unit alone of TM Goodwin Wildlife Management Area yesterday. So come on out to Space Coast Festival and see a lot of birds. Enjoy some very nice weather.